Why do successful owners obsess about minimizing lag time? Welcome to today's episode. Interesting experience today. So I was with the cleaners. The cleaners come and clean the house, and they were speaking of another client that they had visited who was building a new house, and they said, you know what, we're not able to get timber. We're not able to get the wood. We can't build this house out of wood. We've got to use aluminium. We've got to use metal. And this is not just happening in Australia. I got buddies over in the States, and they're saying the same thing. Hey, timber is really expensive. The interesting thing about this is that what is not clear is where did this problem begin? Or not so much where. Pretty sure we know where it started. It started with coronavirus and the shutdowns and the lockdowns. But the interesting question is, when are the problems that we are experiencing now, when are they due to? Are they due to March 2020? Are they due to perhaps September 2020? March 2021? Perhaps September 2021? Probably not September 2021. Why? Because this problem's been getting worse for several months, maybe even a year now. So somewhere in that gap between the beginning of coronavirus and what we are experiencing now began the problems that we're only experiencing today, or in this case of the timber, a couple of months ago. This is a problem of lag time. The problem and the result has such a big gap that it's hard to tell how bad this is actually going to get. Like, if you're thinking, well, lag problems began maybe in December 2020, and now we're experiencing that's 12 months. But if you think, well, actually probably May 2020, now it's 18 months, or perhaps it's only a couple of months ago. But what's interesting is that lag time makes it difficult to get the feedback of that system. And these complex systems of world economies or countries' economies, very difficult to make a judgment about how to act. And it may be far easier to shut down production, difficult as that is, but far easier to shut down than it is to actually scale back up. And even though prices might be sky high for timber, a new entrant into that timber market is also facing high prices in labor, shortages of labor, and relative inexperience in business. This means that even with the lure of high prices, like, look, this timber is getting sold for high margins, high prices, it's very difficult to enter into that market. And so it may be that even though demand remains extremely high while money is cheap, that the number of players that have been taken out already by this coronavirus choices and decisions means that these high prices are here to stay. But what I want you to appreciate here is the lag time. In this case with the timber, we don't even know when the actual problem began. At least in your business, you will have a better idea about, hey, this is what we set out to do. Let's say there was a new project that began, and then at some point it's got a result that is off course. You're like, well, that took 3 weeks to get to that result. So you could go back for next time and improve it and make changes and run it again, and you're going to get an answer within 3 weeks. But I want you to appreciate that a competitor business that can do that same system, that same project in 3 days, because they have a documented system, their processes are written down, they can get feedback so much faster. 3 days versus 3 weeks. They can iterate and make changes multiple times in that same 3-week gap. So at the end of 3 weeks, business one has got one set of feedback because of their long lag time, but business two now has 7 sets of feedback in that same time. They could have made a change, got the result, and then looked at that result and said, hey, did that make it better or worse? If it made it better, they keep that improvement. This is the principle of Kaizen, or incremental improvements. But if it didn't work, then they can revert to the original system and make a different change and try again. So they get 7 attempts at improvement in the same time that the business that does not run systems gets to make 1. Now notice in the business conditions that are existing right now and will continue to exist, 2022, 23, 24, 25, it is highly unlikely that the problems that we are facing are suddenly going to get better. I want to give you the analogy that if you throw a spanner in an engine that has exposed gears, that engine will likely stop. But the restart of that will take a massive amount of work, far in excess of throwing the spanner in. You got to pull all those gears apart, you got to identify the problems, you got to put it back together, you got to get the parts, you got to troubleshoot this whole thing. It is a mess. So we could be existing in these difficult environmental business conditions for years. And what that's going to mean is that any business that has a massive strategic advantage, like knowing how to run their business on systems so that they can run 7 tests in the same time that their competitor runs 1, they are going to thrive. In fact, it is highly likely that those that are existing in such long lag times, because they refuse or choose to not systemize their business, will be bankrupted. They will be eliminated. Why? Because the advantages are just so high for those businesses that know how to reduce the lag time between making a change in a system and getting the result. Of course, that business that runs without systems and takes 3 weeks has an additional problem from that long lag time. Not only does it take forever to get the feedback, but they cannot be sure that this system was run correctly in the first place. You see, when you don't have documented processes and your team don't use them, you cannot be sure that all of the steps got done. Your compliance just isn't there. Versus the business that operates on systems, 3 days, but every time the system gets executed the same way. So if they make one change, they know that that is the one change that caused the different result. The other business does not. They cannot be sure, and they may well be highly misled because they think it's the change, but in fact it was a different execution of that system. This has implications across how we do everything in the world. Basically, anything that has a step-by-step process of getting something done is a system. And the problem that you face is that either your systems are undocumented, they are out of date, or your team do not use them. And you are at a strategic risk of those businesses that choose to get this on point. The advantages are not just in being able to do things 7 times faster, but also that business that can execute systems dramatically decreases their risk of catastrophic errors, the lawsuits, the mispayments, the destruction that can happen from small things compounding over and over until they turn into a giant mess where the time taken to do it correctly might have only been 10 or 15 minutes, and yet the solution takes 10, 20, 100, 200 hours. The business that operates on systems puts in 15 minutes and gets a consistent result. The business that does not takes the risk that that 15 minutes not being completed to standard leads to 200 hours of work. Huge amounts of cost. This is the risk that you take when you continue to choose to not systemize your business. You've got to get this on point. This is coming. This is coming. Those businesses that choose systems will win. They have such a competitive advantage that anyone choosing not to run on systems will simply be unable to compete. And all we will be left with is systemized business competing with systemized business, which is great news because it means that we have highly efficient, highly effective services and products being provided for a world that we need this to be on point. We got problems worldwide because of our lack of systems. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? If you're in business and you're listening to this message, then you've got a choice. You can either continue to ignore the systems conversation, you can ignore the wisdom that comes through from the relatively few books written on systems. Why? Because it's difficult to get it on point in your business. But those that do speak of the Holy Grail, speak of the heavens opening up. Why? Because they run on systems. If this is something that you want, if you want to have a conversation about this, or you just want to get a little bit more educated about what a system is and how they work and why they make such a difference to both the profitability and the protection of all that you have worked for, head over to systemio.dev. Thanks for tuning in today. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode as we continue this journey into the power of systems to create results. See you then.